Daniel, what's up, man? I'm excited to have you, man. We had a great conversation kind of talking about what we were going to cover. And I love what you're doing, first of all. I absolutely love innovators and people that are doing things a little bit differently and people that don't really like. One of my least favorite things is when I hear people say, oh, well, we're just doing that because that's the way it's always been done. That's like one of my least favorite statements. And I know I can tell from your facial expressions you don't really like that either. And the way that you're doing it, I think your practice is fantastic. It's very innovative. What's interesting though about saying it's innovative is actually in some ways like kind of like the way I think it maybe used to be done back in the day. Like it's really simple as well. And it's not what I think people would think of as innovative, but it's definitely a different way of doing things. And I think it's fantastic. So thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate your kind words there. So, yeah, it is kind of a throwback, the model, to maybe what things were like before there was health insurance was really so involved. So, used to be your doc, you'd have your doc, they would do house calls. I mean, to find someone who remembers house calls, they have to be probably into their 80s by now. And when they were a kid, they remember the doctor coming to their house. The doc would have an office with maybe his wife was the receptionist, and like that was pretty
Hmm.
much it. His notes were just notes for himself, or maybe he would occasionally send them out, but they were really notes so he knew, or he or she knew what they were doing last time. So they were literally notes. And, I'm not like a reactionary type person. I just think that with healthcare, I mean, what I've done is I've removed all of the parasites. I got rid of
Hmm.
all the parasites. And when I boiled it all down, it's kind of looks similar to what it used to look like, just with a modern twist with technology, of course.
Hmm.
I'm not
Hmm.
writing paper charts, everything's electronic. I carry an ultrasound around with me, so I don't really use paper a whole lot. So, but the core of it's the same, which is basically spending time with the patient. Um,
Hmm.
I think when you do that, you can have a much better outcome. Because right now the system is built. There's all these high volume practices. It's built for one problem, one patient. 7 minutes of FaceTime. So, God forbid, the patient has multiple problems at once. Like they're going to get terrible care. And if they're a bad historian, like there's no help. I mean, God help them. I mean, if they can't, if they're a poor historian and they have multiple problems, those are the people that get the worst care in our current system.
Hmm. Yeah, and so if you look at you guys listen and check out his website, it kind of gives you a glimpse of what we're talking about. It's easyorthopedics.com. And so your website, like your front page, transparent pricing, that's a big deal. I mean, I don't know that I've ever seen that on a physician's website. Most of the time, nobody knows what's going on there. House calls, you already mentioned that. Delivering relationship-based care, you've kind of hit on that already. Those are not happening at all. Those are big time differentiators. And I guess you can infer this from the website, but in orthopedics. And I think a lot of people are like, what? Is that possible? And I would love to dig into that and kind of talk about how you've gotten to where you're at with your practice. But maybe we could take a step back first, because I think it'd be really helpful to talk about kind of like how you got here in the first place and how you kind of got to this point of starting this new innovative practice. So maybe like before that, like maybe you could share like a little bit about your training and upbringing and kind of how you got to this point of starting this new practice.
Gotcha. A short story with me is I come from a family of engineers, like everybody, like both sides of the family, engineers everywhere.
Hmm.
So that's probably what I would have done had I not had a bad skiing accident where I broke my right arm and both of my legs when I was 14. And so obviously I was pretty messed up from that. And I had all this orthopedic surgery and it kind of got me whole again. And I was like, this is pretty cool. I think this is what I want to do. So 14 years old, I made the decision, which isn't uncommon in the world of physicians. And
Hmm.
sometimes that 14-year-old mentality will come back to bite you decades later when you get to the reality of the decision that you made when you were so little. But anyways, so I do that, go to college, go to med school in Miami, University of Miami, and then I do residency, 5 year. Was fortunate enough to get into orthopedic surgery residency, which is pretty hard to do. I was out in Toledo, Ohio, so I spent 5 years there. And then I started a fellowship in hand surgery. So I was
Hmm.
just going to do hand surgery. And this is where things kind of went off the rails. So a couple of things went on. So I'm in the middle of this hand surgery fellowship, which is an optional year that I've decided to do. I don't need to do. I've decided to do it. And it's a year long. And I'm like halfway through and I'm looking for a job. And I'm looking for a job in Colorado. or in Connecticut, which is where my wife's from and where I'm from, and we're in Colorado now. And it's like, man, I just can't find one. Or if I find one, the best word for it is abusive, where like, they want you taking all of their call all the time. They're giving you the short end of the stick just continuously. And it kind of created this existential crisis where I was basically like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? I mean, college, medical school, residency, you're just grinding, 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 grinding. Your head's down. And then when I finally had a second to look up and I'm like, wow, these jobs are pretty terrible, like they're bad. All I was doing was talking to, I remember interviewing for one of this old senior partner, was just telling me bitterly how much money he made in the 90s, and then how much money he's offering now is like, where it's a big disconnect there. And, the jobs out in Colorado are, like I said, abusive at best. And so that was going on. So that's existential crisis of like, what am I doing? At this point, I've dragged my wife all over the country, for my training, and we wanted to go back to Colorado. And it's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that with my job. So that's going on. And then at the same time, the fellowship, to put it lightly or bluntly, was not a positive educational experience. So it kind of created this huge negative ball of like motivational, unhappy energy. And like I had to do something with it. So I quit my fellowship, like I broke my lease, and we just moved out to Colorado. And I had the idea for the practice from a friend who started something similar in Miami, but with internal medicine. And I said, he's the happiest guy I know, that from my medical school class, and he's doing really well financially. I'm like, there's something here. There's something here.
Mhm.
I don't know what it is. No one's done it for orthopedics, but I was at a point where, I'm living in my in-laws basement, and I'm just going to go for it. So, I mean, a lot of people said like, oh, that's really brave, but it wasn't some sort of calculated, let me sit down and do it. It was a desperation move
Mhm.
where maybe you don't have the time to really think these things through. You just kind of go for them. And that was about 4 years ago. So it's done pretty nicely over the past 4 years. There's key components to it. One is I don't take any insurances. I don't take private insurance, Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, nothing. I treat them all the same. I don't say any of them. And because if I do take insurances, it'll run me into the same problem that every other practice is having, where you don't control your overhead and you need a staff of ratio for approximately 5 to 1. And your reimbursements go down after a year, and it becomes this high volume, crazy practice that's not even profitable and turns into insolvency that gets bought up by private equity or a hospital. So I knew I didn't want to do that. And then what I realized is, oh, I get to spend a lot more time with patients. And I said, no, I'm actually, I think, delivering better care, because if they've got 5 or 6 problems, I can go through all of them.
Mhm.
And my overhead and I decided to be mobile, which keeps the overhead down. So I see patients in their homes or at various offices. I don't pay for any of this. I'm value added when I'm there, right? Like
Mhm.
if a certain provider said, hey, this guy's got shoulder pain, can you come see him in my office? Sure. If they said, but I'm going to charge you, I'd say, well, I'll see him at their house. I always have that default option. And so I keep my overhead low, so I don't need to really turn the treadmill up high to really, do well. So that's kind of the journey in a nutshell.
Everybody's always like, man, it sounds scary and courage, like you were saying. But when you point out a few things I think are super important. You were living in did you say your in-laws basement?
Yeah, we moved into the in-laws basement.
In-laws basement. I would guesstimate that means you had a very modest lifestyle, which
Oh
is
yeah. I mean, we weren't paying the rent. They were just nice enough to give us like housing and food. I mean, so we
mhm.
would pay our own personal expenses, but they were minimal.
Yeah, when your lifestyle is very modest, it's way less intense to go because that's the biggest startup cost. When you're starting a business, the biggest cost is like yourself most of the time. And so when you have a modest lifestyle, that's huge. And so that reduces a lot of this anxiety people have on the front end. You can also reduce your lifestyle before you do it. Some people do that as well, but I think that I would suspect that helped you not feel so intimidated going into it because then you didn't have as big of a nut to crack early on and you could focus in on because that's the other thing I suspect too in the early days it was slim pickings,
Oh yeah.
at the very beginning, right? You weren't just rolling in money right away.
No, no way. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you're poor. I
Right,
think that
right.
first year I got like the child tax credit or something, like because I wasn't making any money. I mean, I think, oh my gosh. I mean, times have certainly changed. I think
Yeah,
I maybe made $500 my first quarter,
yeah.
which, my friends are coming out of fellowship, getting starting salaries of
$500,000.
$100,000, $400,000. I'm living in a basement. I made $500 my first quarter, but I was really lucky to get that, and it snowballed from there.
Mm,
It was just figuring things out. But no, the modest lifestyle is huge because it's like a trade off between autonomy and not having and stuff. So if you
Hmm.
can free yourself from the mindset of I need a lot of stuff, you can have a lot of autonomy.
Hmm.
And I do consulting now for other docs who, are looking to do something similar. And, one complaint that I get, not from the people who actually pay me to consult, but from the people that don't want to pay me to consult, is that, well, what am I supposed to do? I've got this house and all these payments and all these, my kids are in private school and have all these cars. And it's like, well, you golden handcuffed yourself. You took the golden handcuffs and you cinched them around your wrist and cinched them in together. And now you have no ability to move
Uh,
because your payments are so stupidly high. And it's like, why did you do that to yourself? It doesn't,
mm,
I mean, you can still have a very nice existence without being decadent and needing the nicest of every single thing. I mean,
mm,
you can buy your luxuries later when you have more wealth. I mean, but they
mm.
don't. They buy them immediately. And I think that creates a big problem because to
Yeah.
go back from that is hard. And maybe it's not just them, but it's also their family and their kids are now used to that lifestyle. And,
Yeah. It's
taking
like
the opposite direction is difficult.
if you sign a big monster contract, even if it's paying $1 bajillion, and then you got a 5 year lock in, and then you buy the really nice house, and you're doing it for your family with good intentions, and then the private school, like you're saying, and then all the other stuff comes with it, and then the productivity stuff starts to kick in after a year, and then you realize, man, you got to work long hours. You're not even seeing your family. And then they start to, and then you realize you don't have any control. And then you start to feel like burnout, frustration, like this place sucks. But at that point, you got no options. I mean, that's a scary place to be in. Unfortunately, I see a ton of people that are in that exact spot.
Oh, I believe it. I mean, they've been digging their own grave one shovelful at a time. And the
Mm.
irony is you may be working so hard that your relationships with your spouse deteriorate.
Yeah.
And then you
Even
end up
though,
getting divorced and you don't see your family, which is the whole reason that you may have done that stuff. So, I mean,
yeah.
they really trap you. The hospital systems and these large employers, they know they want you to buy the large house. They want you to
Hmm.
buy the nice cars. They want you to be stuck and they give
I
you a
know.
non-compete too. So they know they can give you a decent contract the first 2 years. And then when it comes up for renewal, if they can really hammer you and you essentially have very
Yeah.
little recourse.
I didn't even mention the non-compete. That's even worse. And then what happens to it? Yeah, I've a lot of times they have the realtor like waiting for you when you go visit, and they're like, "Oh, let's go to the $1 million house neighborhood." And the hospital has the realtor that they kind of like introduce. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
I have suspicion that it is an intentionality aspect to that, which is pretty sad, but it does benefit. The hospital has incentives to kind of lock people down.
Oh, yeah.
And the best way to lock somebody down is to get them to buy a big old fancy house.
Yeah, they want leverage, right? You got a non-compete and you need that salary. You are salary addicted. They've got all the leverage in the world. They say, "Hey, you
Hmm.
need to travel out an hour to go see patients at this faraway clinic we just bought." I don't want to. Well, you have to. Okay.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't it doesn't jive well with me. I mean, for me living in the basement, like what are you going to do to me?
Right. Yeah.
I'm already in my in-laws' basement. I'm comfortable there. Not that I want to stay there forever. Like I don't need any money. I mean, I don't need a ton of money at that time. And then as we got more money, I mean, right now I'm in my own basement recording this. So we moved up in the world. But, we did that once the business was stable and we had wealth and we could sort of buy things. And
Yeah.
even as the wealth increases, we still try, I mean, we still buy quality things, but I try to remain frugal. I think
Yeah.
frugality is super important.
Yeah.
Um, some
Yeah.
people, I would say the difference between that and being cheap is someone who's frugal will still spend for quality and buy nice things and do things they want to do, while someone who's cheap just will try to not spend any money if at all possible. So
Period.
I think frugality it would be a good trait among a lot of physicians if they could harness that. But like a lot of them don't because of
Yeah.
all this, like, they've been waiting, 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 waiting. They finally get there. Like, I deserve all this really nice stuff. And I guess they do, but they're setting a trap for themselves.
Yeah. And that's a bad spot to be in. It can come and bite you. And at that point, you don't even want to admit that you're having trouble with work because you're realizing you don't have any options. So you have to kind of like put on your smile and like, which I think would even compound that further because you're like cognitive dissonance. It's like, you're doing one thing and in reality it's completely a different thing. And you're like, who am I? I mean, that kind of stuff really weighs on people and it's a tough spot to be in. The good news about, I mean, if you're listening, you're in like that sort of spot, like you don't have to like continue. The best thing to do is to kind of cut the lifestyle to free up the control to make choices. You're not gonna be able to quit the job until you free up the lifestyle in that sort of situation. You have to do the lifestyle thing first. And then you'll start to feel those options. I've worked with some people that have like sold the big fancy house, moved in with their parents in the basement, and kind of went back the other direction. It's totally possible, and you can get the control back. It just takes some hard decisions.
Yeah, it's all about leverage. So you've built yourself, if you buy all that stuff, right? And like, I totally get the reason why someone buys it. You know, it's not a
Hmm.
morally corrupt decision. It just
No.
causes you long-term pain. I mean, you've essentially created a zero leverage position for yourself. So you want to get leverage back to the point where, you know, the hospital says, we want you to do this. And you can say, I don't want to. And then you say, well, we're going to let you go. And you say, fine.
Yeah.
And they realize, oh, wait a second, we need you. And
Right.
then you can bargain again,
Leverage.
or you can do
Right.
you need leverage. You just, you know, and I think a lot of that comes from being in training as a resident where you have a zero leverage position
Hmm.
pretty much the entire time, maybe
Right.
even negative leverage. I mean, it's really bad. I had
Yeah.
only one single time in residency that I ever had any leverage, which was when I was supposed to sign these documents on time, you know, and I did, but their system went down. So I got them all late, and it would have created like some sort of warning in the system. I said, look, I'm happy to sign them. I realized your system went down. I just want something in writing saying that it's not my fault. And they're like, oh, we spoke to our supervisor and we don't do that. And I'm like, well, then I'm not signing. And they went all the way to my chairman, right? And he's like, oh, he's very
Uh,
smart. He supported me. And then they did give it to me. And that is the only time I ever had any leverage in res. Because, right, you make, you know, because then something later happens and they're like, well, this is a history for you. And you're like, no, that first time wasn't my fault. And they just do not care. So that way you have it in writing. You can throw it
yeah.
out.
I mean, leverage is important, and having the freedom. And so your model, no insurance,
Right.
all cash. Are people paying for services?
Yeah.
I think I know they are, but I mean, I think that's a question.
So by cash, how I define it is not interfacing with an insurance company.
Mm,
So for me, I can do whatever I want as long as I don't have to interface with an insurance company, meaning I don't have to submit notes to an insurance company. I don't have that whole revenue cycle management. As long as I can stay out of that, then it works well for me. So like I've paired that with like medical legal work. I also do personal injury work, which means I might not get paid for a year or two or at all. But for me, interfacing with the lawyer is minimal overhead requirement, generates medical legal work. So that's fine. But going back though, do people pay for it? Yeah, they do. Because, you know, there's a lot of people out there who don't have insurance or their deductible is very high, and I am actually the most economical option for them
hmm
as compared to going in a system where they don't know what they're going to pay and they're going to, you know, they're scared of that. So
hmm
I think people wrongly assume that a direct care model is like, oh, you're just seeing really rich people all the time, and that's really not what it is. I don't think they have a good understanding of the percentage of population with no insurance or bad insurance who are looking for healthcare.
hmm
And you really serve that population much better than, you know, the in-system stuff. So they're out there
Yeah,
for
most of the
sure.
people, I get to look at everybody's financial stuff in my day job. So I get to see all their insurance numbers. And I would say the majority of people have pretty stinking high deductibles on their
Yeah.
health insurance. That's more common than not having insurance, but there's also a pretty large, there's people that don't have insurance at all. There's people that have like health sharing, which is not technically insurance.
That's what I
So
have.
there's all kinds of people that are doing that kind of deal. But maybe you could talk through the economics a little bit. I'd love it if we could kind of just talk like high level, not like details, but like high level, like how are you able to make it work from a financial standpoint? I know your expenses are pretty low. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So my overhead, I haven't calculated in a while. When it's at its lowest, it was like $800 a month, including malpractice. And then my wife works with me now. So it's probably more like $2,500 a month. So I think you're looking at 60, $70 a day, the cost of running the business. That includes
Hmm.
malpractice, equipment, everything, right? You know, the staff's just me and my wife. So I've cut down an office, I've cut out staff. So, I mean, that slashes all your costs essentially to as low as you can get them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if I see one patient, you know, it's like, you know, I travel with them, I give them a steroid injection or something, that's like $400. So, you know, you can do the math there if you add a few of them together. So if you add a few of them together, I mean,
It's like
you're
four a
really
day
not
reasonable.
working a lot. You're really not working a lot, and you're doing quite well.
Is 4 a day reasonable?
Yeah, 4 days is reasonable. And I'm not always hitting 4 days, sometimes more, sometimes less, right? And then I paired
Yeah.
it with medical legal work, or I'll do personal injury.
And that's so 4 a day is like 300 a year minimum.
And you're not
And that's net
right. And you have to, and you also have the tax advantages of
of
your own
business.
business. So you're
Yeah.
not getting destroyed on a W-2. So if mine's an S corp, so I
Hmm.
pay payroll taxes on my small salary, and then I take a monthly distribution, which doesn't go through payroll taxes. So we actually come out a lot more ahead than someone who would get the equivalent amount in
Hmm.
salary.
Yeah.
You also have write-offs that you use for business, like my personal computer. My wife uses has a phone that we use to answer calls on. So, there's those intangible or I guess tangible benefits that you get. But
Yeah.
the other question, which I think is important, is that how many hours are you working also, right?
Yes.
So with the numbers we just ran, you're probably working 3 to 4 hours a day, uh,
Okay. That's huge.
or 4 hours a day. Let's say 5 hours a day.
To
So
be
I mean,
safe. Yeah.
you're talking, and we're overestimating here. You work 5 days a week, 25 hours.
Yeah.
So which in a lot of docs probably work triple that or plus minus. So I
Hmm.
mean, I think the other side of the coin, what a lot of docs don't consider is how many hours are you working for this money? Like to me, it's like, well, how much are you making? And then the follow-up question is, how much are you working? And they don't really seem to
Hmm.
ask that secondary question because they all assume we're all busy as all get out, which isn't always the case.
Yeah.
I spoke to one orthopedic surgeon once, and this really annoyed me. I should have charged him for a consult. I did, and I really regret that because he definitely had the money for it. And anyways, that's a lesson to be learned from me, right? The reason I charge is not to make money; it's just to protect my time.
Your time is
Anyways,
valuable.
he was retired early because he made a lot of money doing a business deal, and he was looking to get back into the kind of mix of things, and had some questions for me. But I was telling him like my revenues, and he's like, "Well, I think you're really selling yourself short." It's like, man, you haven't asked the follow up question. I'm not. How many hours are you working for this? Like, I'm around
Right.
all the
That's
time. I get to
a
see my family all
critical
the time. Right.
point.
Yeah, and like I think that is always the follow up question.
Yeah.
Also, my salary isn't static either. I mean, it increases as the years go on and word of mouth spreads and I get busier.
Yeah. Going back to the scenario we were talking about earlier, like going to work and locking into the hospital and buying the nice house. On top of that, if you throw like 70 plus hour a week commitment, that's a disaster. I mean, that's like, because you don't even have the time to like, well, do see your family, but for sure you don't have the time to like look for new options or be creative or think about new things. But having a lot of people say that like spending time with family or like, I mean, in my experience, because we ask people what's most important, the most common answer is my family. But I always, one of my favorite quotes is like, don't tell me what's most important. Let's look at your checkbook and your calendar and I'll tell you what's most important. And you can look at, your calendar if you're working 80 hours a week. That doesn't resemble that family is most important. Now I get it that like a lot of times you kind of get into these situations that lock you
Yeah.
down, but like this kind of road is way more flexible and you can choose. Plus you're building a business too. That's in my experience, I love doing that. And it's
Yeah.
something you can turn into whatever you want. Like you can make it like your own little, it's just you and your spouse practice that's small, or you could turn it into like a big operation. I believe that this kind of medicine is going to explode in the future and there's going to be demand for, once somebody like you starts making good money or gets the word out that you're efficient with your hourly rate, people are going to be like, I'm already fried at my job. I really need to do this.
I'm hoping that happens. I think with internal medicine doctors, it's already happened because they hit the
Mm,
pain point much earlier, or family medicine doctors, and direct primary care is like tried and true at this point. Right now, for at least for my specialty of orthopedics, they still do pretty well financially. I think that'll change as time goes on as their reimbursements get slashed down 5% every year.
yeah.
So they haven't quite hit that pain point, but I'm hoping more people start. The goal is to build the ecosystem of this kind of alternative model, which in my opinion is better. I mean, you remove all the things that you hate, right? Dealing with the hospitals and insurance companies, especially insurance companies. I mean, the
Mm,
hospitals still provide value. If you're
yep.
really sick, that's where you have to go. But insurance companies really don't. I mean, so there's so many people who lose money on insurance every single year,
Oh
and
yeah.
there's better ways to do it. I mean, I use a health share myself, but
Yeah.
that's a whole podcast in itself. So
Yeah.
my goal is to disrupt those sorts of things by essentially removing them from the equation.
Yeah. So I know you can make it work for the physician. We just kind of talked through the basic math and we're using like kind of a part-time scenario. But I'm curious, I think it sounds better for the patient, particularly because maybe financially and care-wise. But I'm curious to confirm your thoughts on that. Like, do you feel really strongly about it being a better model for the patients as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly in the clinic, yeah, I do think it is because medicine is a time dependent practice. So if someone just wants to do a good job with you, they need to spend time with you. Now you can be the best physician in the world, but if you only have 7 minutes with someone, you're going to be able to only do 7 minutes worth of work. It's like me asking you to paint a wall in 10 minutes. Like you can do it,
Hmm.
might not be good. So I think that my appointments are booked for a lot longer, like close to an hour. So I get to really spend a lot of time. All questions are answered. They have my cell phone number when they're done and they can call or text. So I think communication is much better. And I think any doc practicing in this sort of model will find themselves a much better position than they were in the previous model.
Mhm.
Now, of course, there's things like trauma where you need to go to a hospital. I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
there's still a role for that. But for just clinical settings and everything, I think that it's better care. I mean,
Mhm,
especially for the person who has multiple problems, especially for the person who's a poor historian, because they
mhm.
get particularly bad care. But it doesn't sound. It's actually a very efficient use of time in a way, because instead of seeing someone for 5 or 6 times, I mean, you can make a lot of progress with them in an hour when you just have that time to spend with them.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you're cutting out a bunch of like this fat in the system that exists, and the patient's paying for that. I mean, the physician and the patient collectively, but like the patient's
yeah,
paying at the end of the day for a lot of that fat in the form of like the premiums just keep going up on health insurance,
yeah,
whether their employer pays it or they pay it, which in the end of the day, they pay it because the employer
right.
passes it through. But like the patients are paying for it at the end of the day, either way you spin it.
Right. Yeah, the employers. I mean, it goes up like double digits every year, and these
Yeah.
companies are raking in record profits, and it's squeezing these companies. So companies are starting to be like, well, what can we do to not pay these disaster premiums? And some of them are going to self-funded. And so like this model works very well for that. Like
Hmm.
I've been able to do some surgeries for a company that basically pays me to do their surgeries, small surgeries, and to them it saves a lot of money. So they're happy about that.
Yeah. So it's like it's better for the patients, it's better for the physician. And I know, there are lots of exceptions and like you're saying, like there's definitely still a place for hospitals and especially in specialization areas. But like I'm just really curious like why more people aren't doing it. It seems to be like a logical solution because I talk to people all day long that are really frustrated by their jobs. In fact, regularly people are like, I hate it. Like, like I despise my work. I hear people say that. Or like, and they're saying, I want to work as hard as I can to get to be financially independent as fast as I can so that I can retire early, or I'm going to switch, or I'm going to do side gigs so that I can get out of this world. But like, there's this other avenue out there in my experience too, I haven't come across yet somebody that's doing this direct pay model where they're frustrated. In fact, they all love it. They won't people won't stop talking about it because they love it so much. So it just kind of is weird to me that like more people aren't doing it.
Yeah. All right. You see all the miserable doctors in the system and all the happy doctors in the
Yeah, I'm
direct
like,
care.
what in the world?
And
It
you're
doesn't
like,
make.
there's a disconnect here. Why are they
I keep
so
I keep talking about it on this podcast because I'm so baffled by it. I mean, I've had like if you're listening, you're like, man, this is enough direct care people. Like, quit it with the direct care. But like for real, I don't. It genuinely seems like such a better option, and I feel like it really can help with a lot of these problems that are coming up. But it's just so slow. Like people are not adapting it.
yeah, so let me see if I can crack this nut for you, at least in my opinion. So you have to look at the mentality of a physician, right? We used to when you're in medical training, which is a while, and you're in there for a good, you're working like, close to 80-hour weeks, 60, 70-hour weeks for 5 years straight, at least for me. That's a lot of training.
Mm,
You are not allowed to be creative at all. So, and I don't even mean like artistic projects. I mean, like you see system processes, if you attempt to change them or suggest a better way, and it can be the most asinine thing you can think of. You don't even get like, no, you get this is the way we've always done it, which I hate, obviously.
mm.
But more than that, you get beaten down, you get meetings, you get stomped into the ground. So that happens to you a couple of times, like it happened to me. Like I got in trouble a lot intern year for that, and then
I
the
could see
rest of
you
the
being
years
a
I did it.
troublemaker,
Yeah, I mean, not for patient care, but for that.
stirring things up.
Yeah, for like basically being like these systems are really bad, and then
Yeah.
people like got really mad at me for like saying that, and so I stopped saying it. So basically, by the time you come out of training, your creativity to do anything like that is smushed, and
Mm,
then your ability to take risk along with that is as well. So with any new business, you really need a good risk profile, and you need an ability to take. You need some creativity, and like once I got out of the system, all that came back to me, and that's what's led me to be successful. The very things that would cause me to get in trouble while being in the system are the same things that lead me to be successful out of the system. So I think they have trouble reharnessing that or finding that again, especially if they're still working in the system.
Hmm.
And like we talked about the lifestyle issues, that locks them into a salary. So with any new business, you're going to be poor for a while, unless you're venture capital backed, which I wouldn't. I don't know. That's not my thing. But you're poor for a while, and I don't know if they're not able to do that. They made a good amount of money for too long, even though they're making less as time goes on. So I think between all those things, they haven't, you know, they're not able to do it. I mean, so the activation energy, I guess, is what I'm saying, is extremely high. And I think that's why you saw it in primary care docs, because the pain point for them was so high that they've managed to now do it. But even still with them, it's still a small percentage of docs that have done direct care. And some of those docs who are most damaged by the systems are the most ardent defenders of it. They're the first ones to tell you that this will never work, like this isn't blah blah blah. And it's like, meanwhile, they're also the most damaged by the system at the same time. So they're like, maybe they're like defending a system that's abusing them. Because if they had come to the realization that, like, oh, like I could do this other thing that's better and I'm not doing that, it causes some sort of strife.
Hmm. Yeah, but I think hearing people talk about it more. I mean, that's partly why I haven't stopped talking about it for a little while. I think the more you hear stories and examples of people doing it a different way and blazing the trail and doing it, kind of like nobody had done it how you've done it before you did it, and so that's especially scary for some people. But like as you start to see more people do it and the model becomes more clear, and I think it's a little bit less prone. And I'm sure that there's going to be companies like yours will grow, and then you're going to be like, I might want to hire, and I have clients that are doing this now, like indirect care, indirect primary care. They're like, I need to hire another physician, and I'm going to hire him on a salary. And then there's the risk goes down to where you're not having to like just straight up jump into the unknown.
Yeah, I think you're going to see that. It might happen to me at some point. It would be nice to get somebody who complements my skill set in the world of orthopedics, and like I'm playing a long game here. Essentially, is what I'm saying. Like,
Hmm.
my practice is paradoxically more stable than most of these big hospital system or large private practice contracts. Doesn't seem like it would be, but I get my revenue from a lot of different sources, different, and if one of them goes down, it's not a big deal. Meanwhile, if you're working for these companies, I mean, there's so many mergers and acquisitions, and there's so much political fighting that you may find. I mean, I don't think these big system jobs are really stable right now, to be honest with you.
No, I agree. There's so many things brewing, and in your position, one of the ways I like to look at entrepreneurship, it's like in your position, you have to have, I don't know how many patients you see, but like they all have to fire you. Like they all have to stop working with you for it to kind of be a big, huge blow up. Versus at the hospital, like usually one person can kind of make that call.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah,
that's pretty scary.
it is super scary, and you could be a good doctor. And
Yeah.
if you're just not productive enough, if you're not the surgeon who's cutting on to every single thing that walks in, they're going to be not happy with you. But maybe you're a really good doc who still does a lot of surgeries. You're just not as productive as the doc down the hall who's lauded for just doing surgery on anything that has a pulse.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other dynamics. I mean, I could tell you stories too. I mean, it can be, I'm not saying always, it can be really bad.
Hmm. Yeah. Would you say you were always an entrepreneur? Like if I was asking you in residency or fellowship or something, like would you have said you were an entrepreneur then?
No, I wouldn't have said I was an entrepreneur. I never had a chance to.
Yeah.
Like once I started, for me, I'm like, oh my gosh, I love this. This is like a natural rhythm of my life. Like,
Yeah.
feels like the right stride and pace and everything. So I really love entrepreneurship, but I didn't know until I started. And not everybody's like that. I get that. But I think for me, it's like a means to have control and autonomy over my life is by also being an entrepreneur and putting work into that.
Yeah. One of the things I love about entrepreneurship is it seems to align more with, or like you're incentivized kind of to like do self development. It's like the things you need to develop to be a good entrepreneur are also good life skills, like failing, screwing, having mistakes. Like in entrepreneurship, mistakes are a positive. Like it's like learning, failing forward. Versus, in the real world, that's kind of how it is too. I know in medicine a lot of times, like it's not looked at that. You have to have high expectations, and it's more like perfection is the target. But in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of skills, and you have to develop. You have to market yourself and be able to sell the services and grow a business and handle the finances. The financial part is one of the biggest things. Like you're kind of forced to be thrown into the financial aspects when you run a business. You kind of have to know baseline financials. Like you got to keep the books and I mean, you can't really hire everything out, right?
No, yeah. I mean, like for me, I remember at one point I'm like, I've got all these money that people owe me on this piece of paper. I'm like, maybe I should put it in an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm like, oh, there's my accounts receivable, right? That
Right.
I now had for years. Yeah. So that's fine. There's figuring it out for sure. There's making, well, that didn't work. I'm not going to do that again. And with me figuring out how the heck do I market myself, you know, I found out who the good referral sources are and who's not. And, I make
Yeah.
sure I develop the good relationships, and the ones that don't refer, I don't,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff I've had to figure out, but it's been enjoyable. I mean, most of my reading has been sort of like behavioral psychology lately, which I
Right.
think helps with is the best for small business. I would kind of advocate against an MBA, at least for small business. I don't think that's if you want to
Yeah.
work in the corporate bowels somewhere, or you want to make really good connections to possibly get a good job in business, then MBA can be helpful. But for running small business, I think it can be kind of detrimental because I think everything is focused on human relations and things that, not just boiling everything down to numbers. So that's my 2 cents about that. But yeah, I think failing is okay in entrepreneurship. Yes. But then there's the medicine side. Like, you don't want to do that. You are aiming for perfection. You try to do the best possible standard of care job you possibly can every single time. But with entrepreneurship, it's a little bit more, you're exploring. There's some level of exploration that you're
Yeah.
doing.
One of the best ways to market a business is to be different, like very unique and different. And your business is very unique and different. I mean, there's nobody now. In some ways, that can be a challenge early on because there's not any market awareness for it yet, or it's lower. So people are like, "What? What do you mean? Like I gotta pay? That's what my health insurance is for." But differentiation, like you got that nailed. Like you're very,
Yeah, I guess so.
you got some serious differentiators, which is really good. Typically for marketing. And
Yeah.
that's the thing. Everybody's kind of doing the same thing. It's like, well, that's no different.
I mean, I don't pay for marketing either, too. So my marketing budget's zero. I do networking and then word of mouth at this point. So I
Hmm.
spent, me taking someone out for lunch to me is like, I guess that's marketing dollars in a sense, but
Hmm.
I'm not like big on advertising. I mean, that's just, that's such a black hole of money to
Yeah.
put
The
in.
the other thing, my experience of word of mouth marketing versus like referrals, provider referrals, like in a hospital referrals or whatever, like word of mouth marketing, you tend to get people you get along with or like you're in the same sort of values circle more often because you're typically being referred by somebody that you liked or they liked you and that also they like themselves. So my experience has been that word of mouth referrals are far and away the best from a connection standpoint, not necessarily anything else, but just from a like connectivity standpoint, which is really good because that's one thing that I've heard a lot of physicians say too is they are like, it's very frustrating to work with patients that don't value what I do at all.
Oh, yeah. It happens to me, but extremely rarely. Most of the time, if I'm seeing them, they have to decide whether I'm going to be valuable or not. So yeah, generally speaking, I don't want to work with anybody who doesn't value, what I do. But that is extremely frustrating, because they're
Hmm.
like, well, why am I seeing you? You're like, if
Right.
you got all these problems. I mean, that's why you're seeing me. But to go back to word of mouth marketing, I think it's the most powerful and it's the least expensive, but it also takes the longest.
Yeah, it does
It
take.
just takes a really long period of time. But once you get it going, it's solid. And I mean, that's also the problem with these employee jobs. If they boot you out of town with a non-compete, there goes all that goodwill that you've built up over the years among the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about as we start to wrap up, you have some really good advocacy going on LinkedIn. If for those of you guys listening, make sure to check out Daniel's LinkedIn profile. He's got all kinds of I mean, maybe some people get offended. Probably like, a small percentage of people sometimes get offended, which I think is a good sign of like truth coming out because it's going to be offensive. And a lot of people in our world today are like afraid to offend people. And that's another thing I respect about you is you're like, it doesn't appear afraid about offending people. Go read some of his LinkedIn posts and you'll kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. But one of the examples I looked at recently was talking about not doing prior authorizations.
Oh yeah.
And that I mean, and that's people are like, what?
Yeah, I mean, so that was interesting. So for me, I don't deal with insurance, but sometimes people have insurance. Like the example was a lady wanted to get an MRI of her neck, or I thought she needed an MRI of her neck. You know, she had these symptoms for a while. She was kind of a recluse for COVID, staying at home, and we tried some therapy shots, whatever. And I order it, and she wants to use insurance, which is fine. And then I get a call from some company out of Massachusetts, and I'm in Colorado. And they're like, "Oh, we're just gathering information for your prior authorization." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't believe in those." And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't do those." And like, it was just silence because no one probably ever said that to her before. And she's like, "It's for your patient." And I'm like, "I'm sure it is." But I'm like, if the insurance company denies it, that's on the insurance company, not me. I'm not contracted with any of them. I don't have to do prior authorizations. And I called the patient and I said, "Hey, I think they're going to deny your MRI." I would call them. And she called them and she gave them hell and they approved it. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that strategy will always work, but it worked that time. But the whole point is they exist because we say, okay, I'll do them, you know? And so, you know, it's an attritional game, which I think is really stupid. The insurance companies don't want to pay for it, even though they do want to pay for it, which is a whole different story. But so I posted that on LinkedIn and people were like, I hate prior authorizations more than anyone, but we have to do them, you know? And it's like, you're the reason that prior authorizations exist because you continue to do them.
Yeah, you got to draw the line.
And what'd you say?
You got to draw the line.
Yeah. I mean, at what point, you know, I'm the medical expert. I'm seeing the patient. I'm not benefiting financially from this MRI. It's for clinical diagnosis and reasons. The person's paying their premium. They have a right to get that MRI. And is the insurance company tell me to deny it? Based on what? Based on some medical expert that's in the bowels of the building that has never seen the patient? They've never seen the patient. I mean, it's hard to make, you know, medical recommendations, you know, in that sort of situation
It's
without
almost like health insurance is trying to make health calls.
they do.
Yeah.
They direct medical care and have no liability for it. So if we wanted you to get an MRI of, so let's say, you know, something, and they denied it, and let's say it showed a tumor that was now metastatic, like they have zero liability in that exact case, zero. So they could have caused a detriment of your health, and they aren't liable for it because they say at the end of the day, well, we're not saying you can't do it, we're just saying we're not going to pay for it. But in the reality of the situation, it means that it's not going to get done. So I feel that they should have medical liability if they want to deny care along those ways. Yeah, you get people being like, well, they just want to make sure that the MRI is appropriate. It's like, how do they know? Are they sending their own doctor there to evaluate the patient? No. So how can they make that determination?
Yeah, the
You know?
doctor's already said it.
Yeah, the medical doctor, considered a medical expert, right, has already said it. And most of the time is not benefiting financially from that, but yet they say no. And then 90% of the time they end up approving these. So they're just dragging the doctor through like an hour-long phone session where it has to be peer-to-peer, doctor to doctor. And if you've ever done one of these peer-to-peers, you get to it and it's like, I'm talking about ankle syndesmosis to a cardiologist who I'm sure is extremely intelligent, but has no idea what he's talking about. And I know that because he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm just going to approve it. So, I mean, that is, you know,
train wreck.
So I just avoid all that. It's like, I'm not participating in it. I don't do that. We can get you a cash MRI for $500, which may be less than what you pay with a deductible anyways. And then the funny thing is when you order an MRI for cash, it just gets done like same day. The facility loves to have those. There's nothing to do. They just patient pays, they get it. They can use an HSA or whatever. And it's great.
Yeah, it's somehow, I mean, it amazingly becomes super simple when you eliminate insurance, especially from the mix. And sometimes the hospital can get a little screwy too, but insurance is just a train wreck. Try to figure out your billing. Good luck with that.
Yeah, I mean, you can outsource it, but how do they know if they care? The people working for you, maybe.
And then you're it's the cost of paying for people to deal with all the junk. Like that's added overhead.
It's huge overhead because it's a lot of staff, and then also you need to house this staff, so your office is going to be bigger, and then also like the benefits as well, which just comes back to insurance on the other side. So it's what's driving these practices into insolvency and why they're considering getting bought up by private equity, which, you know, in my opinion, is probably one of the worst groups that can buy into medicine because they, obviously only care about money, which is what their job is. And I think that sometimes conflicts with good medical care, even though they'll basically lie to you and say it doesn't. Um,
Always, maybe I would say always.
yeah, always. Yeah. And funny thing about private equities, they'll say whatever they need to say to get the keys to the castle, right? And I think as physicians, we don't assume that somebody would be lying to them,
Dishonest.
but
Yeah.
they do. Like they'll make it up if they have to.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of physicians are extremely naive.
Yeah. Yeah. They'll just convince themselves it's true temporarily.
Right. I mean, whether it's lying or it's bullshitting, who's to say? But it's not truthful, whatever
Yeah.
it is. In a lot of these cases, I would guess.
Do you think physician burnout will increase?
Oh yeah, it's going to accelerate. I mean, because
Yeah.
the abuses of that system. Look, the United States is considered the wealthiest country in the history of the world. All right, history of the world, wealthiest country. And 20%, about 20% of the GDP of dollars spent is on healthcare. So it's this monstrosity. There's so much money in it. And the entities that are making that money want to make more money, like health, hospital systems, pharmaceuticals, health insurance companies. And so that will only increase as, they'll just keep leaning in that direction. So all the systemic abuses that physicians face will increase as just becomes an accelerated process, as they get more and more resources. So yeah, I think it'll increase. I don't think the shelf life of a physician in the system is like 30 plus years anymore. It's
Mm.
probably half of that at this current point in time, at least in that model.
Yeah. Something's gonna blow up though. I mean,
Yeah.
the more painful it gets, it's like ripe for disruption.
Yeah. I mean, in a weird way, it's good because it'll drive more people into this other sort of model that I think we need to grow and build. Eventually, if we get enough people and different providers and physicians in it, it can be comparable to the other model. It's just without all the stuff that you hate. But again, it's like one piece at a time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, Daniel, this has been fun. I love good conversation about entrepreneurship, and your business sounds super cool, and I'm excited to hear it's doing well. I think the more that kind of thing happens, the better. I mean, that's kind of like a shining light in the train wreck of healthcare. And keep up the good word on LinkedIn.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, Daniel. Yeah, I'll try. I just try to just sow discord on there, plant seeds of truth to the best of my ability, and and then just, people hate on it. Most people like it. I'll just
Yeah.
keep going until I'm forced to stop.
Yeah. No, keep it up, man.